This is The Wilderness and the Wellspring, the podcast companion to the newsletter of the same name, about the difficult times when you want to give up on your creative pursuits and the beauty of the act of creation. I'm your host, Jeff Lunt. This is Episode 6, Competing Priorities. Hey there, podcast listeners. If you like what you're hearing, and you'd like to see the show reach a broader audience, there's a couple of things you could do that would really be helpful. The first is to share the show with someone you think would find it interesting. And the other thing you could do is consider taking a few moments out of your day and leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. If you decide to take time out of your day to do either of those things, I just wanted to say thank you for listening, and I really appreciate it. And now, on with the show. Welcome back. It's been a little while. And this is an object lesson in a lot of ways for me about priorities, saying no to things so that I can say yes to some other things, to make time for creative work. It's been a while since I've recorded a podcast episode. And it's been a mix of sort of writer's block. I've had a list of topics in mind for quite a while. But I've found it difficult to execute on any particular one of them. I even had a conversation with a friend of mine just last week, I think. We were chatting over Discord, and he suggested we have a phone call, catch up. Actually, this friend was Kyle Gherkin, one of my podcast episode guests. And, he suggested we catch up, and we were talking about AI and all that stuff, and risks of AI and whatnot. And I floated the idea that maybe we could record the conversation, but I was kind of non-committal about it. And then we could talk about that. We could talk about whatever else we wanted to talk about. So when that phone call actually happened, I didn't hit the record button, and I just felt, I felt strangely like the time wasn't right somehow, which is a little weird because I find more and more that when you don't take an opportunity in front of you, what you're really saying no to is the possibility that it might be good. Or a little bit that self-doubt creeping in to say, this might not be good enough. You haven't done any preparation really for this. Do you really want to wing it? The self-doubt that comes from that. And there's something to be said about preparing for something, of course. But throughout our lives, we're not always prepared for everything. And that's okay. Sometimes when you wing it and it goes well, it's because you're open, and you're open to the idea of a possibility, and you're just being there and present if it shows up. And if it doesn't, you're not upset or frustrated by it. You're just sort of there if it happens. So what does that have to do with what I wanted to talk about today? Competing priorities. This is kind of similar to episode 3 about finding time and saying no. And I think the way it ties all together for me is like not saying no to an opportunity just because I don't feel that I'm at 100%. It's like people say, the hardest part about working out is putting on your shoes to go to the gym, or, taking the first step, basically. It's once you're there, you're at least going to do a little bit of work. Once you're in the flow of, or not in the flow, but heading in the direction of working on a long-term goal, you will at least, at a minimum, have started doing it again. And that's something. So many long-term goals, things that take multiple years, are a matter of building a habit more than cranking out the work. Because if you're talking about projects that take multiple years, it's the habit that actually moves you forward over time and makes a bigger difference in how much you actually wind up getting done. And that winds up having more of an influence over how far you get than some kind of productivity hack or anything else. This reminds me of a nonfiction book that Stephen King wrote years ago. I think it was called On Writing. And it's a short book. It's about his writing process and his experience as a writer, and some other things that kind of border on advice to creative writers and such. I thought it was a worthwhile read, but the thing that after all this time really sticks with me is that he said the biggest thing he does is he just sits down and he writes, and it's the habit, it's the putting in the work, and even when he doesn't want to. And sometimes what he writes when he does that is good, and sometimes it's not. But he has to go back to the well and just keep putting in the effort. I've been thinking about that a lot over the last few months. When I started this podcast, I told myself that it was more important to get started and to keep going and to just not stop, even if I needed breaks of several weeks or months in between. I shouldn't stop, that I should just keep going. Same thing with the indie game dev that I'm doing. Same thing with any other creative project that I'm doing. The important thing is to keep going. Take breaks when you need them, but come back and do it even when it's hard. So on the theme of competing priorities, common competing priorities we, almost everyone can identify with are, doing some form of work to keep a roof over your head. You may have family obligations, kids, you've got personal life and things that are important to you that are non-work related. You need rest and time with friends and that kind of thing. I have all those things. I don't have kids, but, I'm married, I have family. And what I find with competing priorities is a mix of balancing all the things that I have to do with the things that I would like to do. And then even within the section of things that I would like to do, there's a lot of, there's like many creative projects within that. And I find that I mostly follow my motivation, like which project I work on at any given time is based on whether I have an idea of what to do next, or if there's any problems that need to be solved in order to progress on that particular project, as well as what motivation I have for working on different projects. The biggest challenge with the motivation piece, I think, is that, at least for me, motivation is one part the dream of reaching the goal, of finishing the project, and another part just putting in the time and work, knowing that sometimes I'm not going to feel motivated, but I need to sit down and think on it, work on it, do something related to the project to move it forward, whether or not I feel like doing it. I've got myself in kind of an interesting place creatively think I find that my creative life is more satisfying now than it's been in a really long time. And that's good. But now I'm experiencing this renewed energy, and it's leading in part to wanting to do more things than I have time. I have 3 video game projects out there. One is called DVMO, Deep Void Mining Operations. It's a space asteroid mining simulator game, and it's complete enough that you can play it online. It's a free game you can play in your browser. It's meant for mouse and keyboard, and it's not a really deep game in the sense that there's only one level, and it takes about 35 minutes to an hour and a half, depending on how you play, to finish that level. And it's a very chill game, not stressful, great way to relax. And that's sort of complete enough to be considered a game, but it's shallow enough in its content that I think it's fair to say that it's more of a beta or demo than a full-fledged game. Another game I'm working on that doesn't really have a title yet, but it's kind of a mix of the old Choplifter game, if you've ever played that, from the 1980s, and games like Jungle Strike from the or Desert Strike from the Sega Genesis era. It's sort of like you have a flying vehicle that has weapons on it, and you're going around to rescue hostages and take them back to the base. And it's more of an arcade shooter kind of thing, but it's not a bullet storm game. So that game's going okay. The design is okay. I'm working with a pixel artist on the art, and frankly, the pixel artist is further ahead than I am. The artist has already sent me updates on the tile set and some of the scenery and some of the vehicles. But I've had to put that project aside to deal with some other stuff, which I'll get to in a minute. And then the third video game I'm working on is one called Soul of Argus, which used to be called Shadow of Argus, and before that it was called something even harder to explain, but I won't go into. But I've been working on that game for years. Soul of Argus is sort of a very large, ambitious simulation type game. It's actually what restarted my creative journey years ago. And DVMO was a little bit of a distraction not a distraction. It was a fun, smaller side project that I worked on for 4 or 5 months. And then the arcade shooter type game was something I just wanted to pick up to, I don't know, it's actually a game I've had in mind for years, and I wanted to try making. I wanted to see what it would take, and it was something that took me maybe a few weeks or a month or so to get some kind of really basic playable thing that, had programmer graphics in it and like nothing particularly special, but I found it interesting and fun. And then I reached out to the pixel artist to kind of get some art going. But yeah, these competing priorities. Well, it's just a constant struggle, right? And I've been, let me go back actually. So the thing I wanted to touch on, I had to put all of the game projects on hold last month because I was having some insomnia. I was having difficulty falling asleep, difficulty staying asleep, and it was resulting in a situation where I was getting maybe 3 hours of quality sleep, which wasn't nearly enough. And then sometimes I'd get 6 or 7 hours of sleep total, but it was restless and stressful sometimes. And so I had to kind of pause on everything to fix the insomnia, or at least divert some of my attention to addressing it, because it was really leading to a lot of pain and difficulty concentrating. And it was sort of, when you're not sleeping consistently, it kind of destroys your ability to do a lot of other things. And So yeah, I'm coming out of that hole now. The insomnia is, thankfully, it's not a chronic issue in my case, and that the things I needed to do to get myself back to normal were just really taking a careful look at my various habits, my sleep habits, how much caffeine I was drinking and taking in per day, and at like what times a day, and other things that are thankfully in my case just pretty basic, honestly, but important to mind, So yeah, so now I'm kind of on the other side of that, feeling much better, and the creative juices are starting to flow again, which is good. It's been a while since I've felt energized enough to do this stuff, so I'm glad that I'm back. And so a lot of the theme of this sort of podcast and the way that I do it, and this very chill, like calm, slow presentation style, is a way for me to get myself in that sort of calm mindset so that I can concentrate on the hard creative problems. And yet it's interesting how, if you don't make in this particular acute case, sleep, and if I don't make my health a priority, it doesn't matter what other priority I want to set, because you can't really get much done when you're not sleeping. So, This has been a little bit of more of a flow of consciousness kind of episode. Got some other ideas, probably 4 or 5 other ideas for episodes I'd like to do. They're still kind of percolating. I think I've been waiting for the energy and the time and to be sufficient and to be rested enough that my normal creative process can continue to happen. And I'm glad to report that it's kind of back on track. But as for this episode, I think that's it. So if any of you are struggling with competing priorities, as I know pretty much everybody is, living in the modern world and trying to get stuff done that's not just whatever immediate fire is right in front of them, I know we all struggle with that. So I'd be interested to hear some of your stories. Leave me a comment below or on the podcast, or reach out. And thanks for listening. See you next time. This has been the Wilderness and the Wellspring podcast. You can find me on Twitter at Jeff Lunt Games. It's because my creative pursuits are creating indie games on the side. You can also share this podcast and blog with anyone you know that might find it interesting. You can find me on Substack at wildernessandwellspring.substack.com. And I just wanted to say thanks again for listening. See you next time.